What is revenge? Is it something you must achieve in order to feel better within yourself about past grievances? Or is it something which you use to get even rather than to find peace through? What if the initial hurt was not inflicted on you directly, but someone close to you? Does that still give you the right to seek revenge? It's the life of a man from Cork which answers these questions for us. This is his story. In the West Cork town of Skibbereen in 1891, a child was born. His name was Gearóid O'Sullivan. Gearóid's father Michael was a native of Lochine, a lakeland area of West Cork about 5 kilometres from Skibbereen. Scéal Fadagéir. The lake itself was once a freshwater lake, but after the unforgiving sea bombarded the coast of West Cork, routes to the sea opened and it became a rare lake whose waters are both Atlantic seawater and freshwater. It was these rare waters which led nature to do what it does best, adapt. There are still today creatures which evolved in the area which can only be found in the lake and its surroundings. In the lake's waters, a rare form of plankton lives. When these are disturbed by sea creature, man or boat, they light up and illuminate the waters as though infected with stars who cannot be released. At night, this is the most spectacular sight. It's not just the plankton who swim through these waters. Dolphins, seals, and other wildlife of the sea have been known to visit. It is a treat to witness a dolphin's leap from the water on a warm summer's day in the West Cork sunshine. The water itself is so deep, it is said locally that if you were to drop the Statue of Liberty to the bottom of the lake, you would not see a sign of it ever being there. Around the lake are vast cliffs, mountains, trails and viewpoints, all leaning over the lake to highlight the power and beauty of nature in all its glory. The fields which complete the landscape are amongst the most fertile in West Cork, an area not generally blessed with fertile lands. It was this setting which should have created a childhood filled with joy, wonder and prosperity for Michael. However, Michael was born into a home who had done their very best to survive the famine. When Michael's parents, Gearóid's grandparents, were young and doing their best to survive in a state which did not want them, the Great Famine brought a wave of horror and sadness to our island. In the 12 months of 1845, 1/3 of the entire potato crop was lost to blight. The majority of the other 2/3 was exported to feed the British Empire, and with that the poor Irish Catholics lost the only crop which had provided them with sustenance. Skibbereen struggled as best it could, but greed and famine showed no mercy for the stricken, and 1/3 of its population joined the realms of the dead almost instantly. The deaths were occurring too quickly for the remaining locals to manage. Trapdoor coffins were brought to the area so that burials could take place in mass pit graves on a rotation. While you were already starving and close to death's door, you would have to carry your dead child, brother or parent from the hovel you called home, place them into a coffin and watch as the bottom of it was pulled, and then see your loved one fall from it into a pit with your neighbours, cousins and friends' dead bodies breaking the fall. Can you imagine the sound of the bodies slapping off each other as they fell? Is it a sound one could easily forget? Today, there are still 10,000 unidentified bodies in burial pits in the Skibbereen region. It was not just the hunger the people of Skibbereen had to fear. Rents were raised by the landlords who had seen the hunger as an opportunity to move the poor from the lands and make it available for animal grazing. When these new high rents could not be paid, your thatched roof was set alight by the British agents of the town and your walls were knocked down. Today, across West Cork, still stands the stones of the hovels where our ancestors were forced to live and then flee. As the weak became weaker, the locals were no longer able to carry the bodies to the graves, and they were left on the roads and ditches of West Cork for the birds, dogs and other animals to feed on. For those who were weak but allowed the dignity of death in their own homes, the last survivors of households were known to have locked themselves into their homes, along with their dead loved ones, so that when they too died, their bodies would at least not be feasted upon. Homeless, starving, and surrounded by the decomposing bodies of family and friends, the people of Skibbereen lived in hell. As the famine ended and the area began to recover, it was clear to all the once prosperous town of Skibbereen would never be the same again. West Cork forgives, but it cannot forget. It was these tales that Gerod's father was raised on as he grew up on the banks of Lough Hyne. It was these tales Gerod himself grew up on in Skibbereen, as generations of the remaining Irish gathered by their fireplaces telling stories to ensure the horrors of Skibbereen would never be forgotten. As a young boy, Gerod attended the local primary school. From a very early age, his teachers recognised he had tremendous capacity for learning and retaining information. He was selected by the school to be a mentor to the other children, even those older than himself. As he grew older, he was even involved in lessons where he educated the teachers on subjects. In his school, the children shared the stories they were told at the weekends of what the old people had said about the famine. They were shared around as sort of ghost stories in the schoolyard. The children understood that it was the oppression of the foreign crown which had caused the suffering, and it made them natural nationalists, all understanding that Ireland's suffering may one day end if the crown was banished from the island. Gerod was then granted admission to Daniel Duggan's University School in Skibbereen. Here, as he grew older, Gerod, the other students and the teachers were able to discuss the famine and their nationalist views in great depth with each other. He formed a great group of friends who were from strong nationalist families. Amongst them was a boy called James Duggan, a local activist. He was also a good friend of Gerod's cousin, fellow West Cork man Michael Collins. James encouraged Gerod to join the Gaelic League, which he did. In 1909, as Gerod reached the point of schooling where Skibbereen could offer him no further education, he moved to Dublin to train as a teacher in St. Patrick's College. Gerod had a great love of teaching and saw it as something which liberated and opened doors to the poor. He advanced quickly in his course and completed his exams ahead of schedule. In 1911, he got his first job as a teacher. He was posted back to Kildorrery back in Cork, but was soon transferred back to Dublin to St. Peter's National School. It was here he sought out and joined the local Gaelic League. Soon after his joining, he was elected to a leadership role in the organisation dedicated to relighting our Celtic souls. He set out and travelled around Dublin and the wider area in his spare time, teaching Irish to as many people as he possibly could. It was through his work breathing life back into Celtic Ireland that revolutionists began to take note of him, and he was asked to join the group looking to overthrow English rule in Ireland. Given his background, this was hardly a decision for Gearóid, and he had joined before they had finished asking him. He began training with the Irish volunteers, learning how to march, how to hold a rifle, how to shoot, and military strategy. He himself taught Irish to the volunteers. It was while in this role he learned that his cousin Michael Collins had returned from London and was now in Dublin. Gearóid set out to find him and bring him to join the cause of Ireland. In 1913, whilst working as a teacher, Gearóid was appointed to F Company 1st Battalion of the Dublin Brigade of the Irish Republican Brotherhood. 3 years later, at the age of 25 and as the youngest fighting officer, Gearóid and Michael were part of a group who marched out of Liberty Hall on Easter Monday, 1916, towards the GPO. By 11:55, they had seized the centre point for communications in Ireland. Across the city, rebels marched up the streets and roads, attacking British military posts and establishments, claiming the country as their own, free of oppression. Each of the men and women fighting for Ireland carried with them their stories of their ancestors' pain and suffering. Gearóid was appointed aide-de-camp to Sean McDermott during the fighting, but his main role was yet to be played. As the rebel yell cried out across the city, Padraig Pearse marched out of the now captured GPO into the heart of Dublin. From there, he read the words of the Irish Proclamation of Independence. Irish men and Irish women, in the name of God and of the dead generations from which she receives her old tradition of nationhood, Ireland, through us, summons her children to her flag and strikes for her freedom. As he finished, the realization struck the British in the city that war had been declared. They rallied their troops and made their way to the GPO with the force of an empire against the farmers, tradesmen, poets and teachers. When Pearse returned to the doors of the GPO, he pointed to Gearóid and shouted, "Young fella, Taranshaw." Gearóid walked up to him and Pearse told him to put out his arms. In them he placed the tricolour of Ireland, a flag representing the people of Ireland, green for Catholics, orange for Protestants, and white for the peace between them. Pearse pointed to the staircase and told Gearóid to find someone to cover him. Gearóid summoned a young volunteer and together they made their way up the long staircase to the roof of the GPO. As they got onto the roof, they saw the flagpole. Whilst walking over to it, the young volunteer with Gearóid was shot dead. Gearóid had never seen a man killed in front of him before, so it frightened him. He stopped for a moment and couldn't help but look at the man lying dead. Then came the realization that he was now an open target on the roof of an occupied building. By his feet, a bullet rattled off the ground, barely missing him. Gearóid steadied himself and marched to the flagpole. He unfolded the flag and tied it to the pole. Another bullet whistled past him, and he felt its breeze tickle his neck. Fear gripped his entire being, unable to move and holding back his tears, assuming he had now reached the end of his days. A feeling of sickness twisted in his stomach as he awaited his death. He paused and thought of home. He thought of the stories of the old people, what they had seen, what they had lived through, what they had had to do to survive, all for the sake of the Empire's glory. As he thought of this, Gearóid heard a gentle hum in his soul, and as he listened to it, he heard it bellow into an almighty roar. He gripped the rope to pull the flag into the air, and as he pulled, from his soul he heard the roar, for Skibbereen. Over the next few days, Dublin was reduced to rubble as the Crown flexed its power over its subjects once again, and the Irish were knocked to their knees. Gearóid was taken with the other rebels to Famine jail, where he was placed in a cell with Sean McDiarmid. McDiarmid was one of the leaders of the rising and a signatory of the Proclamation. It was this which sealed his fate, and he, along with the other signatories, were sentenced to death. Gearóid, for his role in raising the flag, was also placed on the execution list. In their cell, they listened as their friends and comrades were executed in the stonebreakers' yard for their role in Ireland's cause. When McDiarmid's time came, as he left his cell, his last words to Gearóid were, "Goodbye, Gearóid, we'll meet above." As the executions proceeded, as the death list grew, the Irish public began to raise their voices in anger against the decision to kill each of the leaders. The men who had fought for them in the Rising and during the lockout and the other social movements were picked off as though they held no significance in the lives of the Irish. When the time came for Gearóid to join his comrades, the decision on executions was reversed, and he was sent to Frongach prison until December 1916. He then returned home, and in 1917 he took up a post as a professor of languages in Knockbeg College in Carlow. He retained his involvement in the volunteers despite a further prison term following a seditious speech he delivered in his native Skibbereen. In order to secure his release, he went on hunger strike. He was released, and in 1919 he was summoned to Dublin by his cousin Michael, who had been appointed as Adjutant General of the Volunteers and also acted as Commanding Officer of the Dublin Brigade, from whose ranks Collins picked his famous squad, a story for another day. Gearóid became one of the most important leaders of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, and he undertook secret missions for Michael Collins. So great was his role that the British establishment placed a bounty on his head. In 1921, during the Irish War of Independence, he was elected into the second Dáil representing Carlow Kilkenny. He was re-elected in 1922 as a pro-treaty politician. In 1922, as the Civil War raged on, he served in the National Army. He was one of the few leaders who survived the war. After the wars in Ireland ended and the flag flew free, Gearóid became a barrister, and he married Maud Kiernan. Together they had 3 children. Maud was the sister of the woman Michael Collins had planned to marry before his death at Bailnablaw. Their wedding was originally planned to be a joint wedding until his death. In 1933, he supported the group who went on to become Fine Gael, a group who had taken their ideals from Collins, essentially a pro-treaty group, and in 1937 he ran for election as part of their party. In 1940, Maud died and Gearóid left politics. He later remarried a woman called Mary Brennan from Belfast. On Good Friday, 1957, Gearóid joined her, the leaders of the Rising, and Michael above the clouds as he passed away. Today, above the GPO, the tricolour continues to fly in the spot where Gearóid first raised it in the name of Irish freedom. In front of it stands the female warrior goddess Hibernia, the goddess who lends her name to ancient Ireland. Here she stands with helmet on and spear in hand, protecting the flag for eternity. Today's music was written, performed and produced by myself, Ryan O'Halloran. The story was researched and scripted by Oren. If you want to help to support this podcast, you can buy us a coffee at www.buymeacoffee.com/We the Irish or leave us a review on your podcast app. Ryan is Anand Dum. Gurav Mahagut. Slán Anish.